So, good morning everyone, good morning again. I'm Jing from the University of Hong Kong, and today I'd like to share our idea of developing an open access bin object library based on Hong Kong. So here's the content of our presentation. We will first start with the introduction and literature review to grab an overall picture of it. So followed by a research framework, outputs and discussions and implications and future research. So before we actually start it, I would like to share some thinking of us. So actually why we will start with the perspective of bin objects. This is because bin objects are the most fundamental elements in bin design environment. So designing bin is actually very different from those designed in CAD platforms or things like that. And it's similar to playing Legos. So designers need to put the bin objects together into the design software, and then they will add parametric information on it and group the objects together to form the design. So here, if without ready to use bin objects, then designers need to, spend a lot of time in searching the desirable bin objects for their design, and which will be very time costly in real life project containing millions of objects of this kind. So people start wondering, could we actually find the bin objects elsewhere? The answer is yes. So currently, some software packages such as Revit, they provide some basic bin objects for users to use in the bin design, and some online bin object libraries such as bin objects and MBS National Bin Library, they do provide some bin objects with more detailed information, and so do some manufacturer vendors and material vendors. And bin users could also get the bin objects from their previous projects, such as private and public ones. But here are some problems identified that these objects acquired, they lack sufficient information for the bin design, and also this information is not fit for the specific construction context, such as Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is full of skyscrapers, which is very tall, and it adapts the British standard. And this information doesn't be considered in these existing bin objects. And most importantly, for those objects that are very ready to be used, they are seldom, not always available to ordinary bin users. So this actually comes into our question that could we develop a library, a bin object library that are accessible for the ordinary bin users and based in Hong Kong context. So here is our idea that what is called open access. This means bin objects come from some open sources, such as bin users and online bin libraries, and the library is available to ordinary bin users. So this object library also includes the objects commonly used for Hong Kong building design situations, and also the object information should be regulated to Hong Kong specifications and conventions. So to achieve that aim, we actually done some literature review on it. So it seems that not so many research efforts has been paid to develop such a library, but we still find some. Currently, some research efforts have been paid to develop the library, such as a library of windows and furniture with changeable size, work tolerance, reference planes, etc. And a library is developed of civil structure built onto the joints. However, we find that even though these research efforts define some contents of objects included in the library, however, these efforts are based on a CAD platform and not rather than a bin platform, and the lack of sufficient information of the local contents. And also, research efforts have been paid to how to develop the bin library, such as suggested by Duriado in 2013. There are three issues concerning the development of bin object library. There are library structure, object attributes, source of acquiring objects, And also, reference could be get to obtain this object library, which is like bin, literature, and shop drawings, building components, classification systems. However, we also find that there is no theoretical framework to describe the overall picture of it. So here is what we're gonna. So here is what we're gonna do. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, maybe I am not taller enough, so I just stand up. Okay, so here is what we're going to do to achieve this aim. So we actually have 4 steps to do. You can see in the second column. So objective 1 is to develop a library structure, which is an ontology-based one. So this library structure could help to organize these objects in a more clear and coherent way. So this aims to solve the problem which is still very difficult to retrieve the objects. So the second objective is to define the object parameters, which actually define what bin object is. So this parameters is actually based on Hong Kong construction context, that the information should be confined to the construction context and ready to be used in Hong Kong. So we could do this through a literature review on IFC documents, which we have mentioned just now, and building specifications and interviews with representatives from AEC industry. And so based on the outcomes of these 2 objectives, we can actually try to enrich the bin library by developing an object processing module to help us to enrich the library in a more efficient way. So this is done by a supervised learning, and so by the end of this objective, we are expected to develop an object process module to automatically process this object. So the 4th objective is to share the library and explore its operation mode to achieve the aim of open access. So here's what we got. Basically, this is a conceptual framework to illustrate our ideas. So you can see in the middle of the graphic, the bin object library actually contains of 3 components, which is library structure, bin objects, and the relationship of the objects. So having the library, the next step is to enrich it with the objects from project practice, online bin objects library, and library users. And then the library could be shared within the architecture, engineers, consultants, and manufacturers. So I will lead you through our preliminary research outcomes step by step. So here is a preliminary library structure developed by us. We are thinking that to develop the library structure should actually with clarity, coherence, comprehensiveness, extensibility, so etc. So actually we cannot expect it that we develop a library like stuff like that. So to do that, we need to develop a library based on ontology, which actually help us to define the hierarchy of the library, helps us to define what items actually it is, and help us to know the relationship between each items. And also the existing classification systems such as UniClass and UniFormat, they do provide some examples of how to classify the objects into a more hierarchy situation. And so also the bin and building specifications of Hong Kong help us to unify the naming convention of these so-called items. So here are the 4 layer structure developed by us. You can see layer 1 is actually the major objects, which is the building composition. It has 4 components in it. The first one is substructure and the superstructure and the building surveys and the equipment and services. So, and you can see that the second layer is group object, which contains major types of objects. And the third one is individual objects, such as, for example, the foundation could be classified as shallow foundation, which is based on a Hong Kong context. So having a library structure, the next step is to develop bin object parameters in it. So here's what we got. Basically, there are 4 types of bin parameters. The product information, the process information, the behavior and impacts, and constraints. So the product information describes the physical characteristics of a bin object, such as the identification, the geometry, the material information. And the process information is actually how this object is, the status of this bin object it is in the process. So kind of like the information in the planning, design, procurement, and construction phases. So the third and fourth parameters actually the impacts, the relationship between the objects and the environment. For example, the behavior and impacts describes the function and potential information on other objects existing by a bin object. And the constraint actually describes the influence that the environment and objects do to the bin object. For example, the typological information, which describes the logical relationship of these 2 objects. For example, a bin is located on a column and a window is located on the wall. And there are also building specifications and standards to constrain the information in the bin object. So having designed the object library, so the next step is to enrich the library efficiently with a semi-automatic way. So here is our process. We aim to do this process not by manual efforts because it's too tedious for us to do so. Rather, we would like to develop an object processing module to enrich the library. So this process is rather simple. Given a processing object, it will be extracted against its parameter, terminology, information format, and compare those information with objects from library. And we could tell that if these objects are the same and already existing in the library. If not, it will continue to be modified against the parameter and unification of the terminology and standardize its information format. And the processed object will be then back classified into the library structure and then integrated into the library database. So the last step is to share the library to the industry. So in Hong Kong, here are 2 ways to share it. The first one is so-called creating a value network by carrying out relevant research activities, initiating collaborations between the research team and the industry. So the second method is to work closely with government or professional bodies such as Hong Kong Housing Authority and Hong Kong Construction Industry Council. So after sharing the library into the industry, we would actually like to explore the operation mode for the sustainable development of the library. So here comes to the implication and conclusions. And we define that an open access bin object library will largely increase the efficiency of bin design, and it helps the designer to better retrieve the desirable objects and spend less time on modify the contextual information, and also enable an efficient information management in bin object level. And this study could also provide some valuable implication to develop bin object library in other economics. So here comes our future research. And we propose that our future research could also focalize to develop a localized bin objects library, a bin on object ontology, and a sustainable development mode of the library. So here comes the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your patience, and all questions are welcome. Thank you so much.